All right, welcome back, Hanging Einstein. I'm Andy Singleton. People spend on Twitter. Appreciate everybody tuning in, joining. Thanks again to draftbreakdown.com for simulcasting these, syndicating them. I don't even know the proper term to use for it, but they've been airing these on draftbreakdown.com. So pleased to continue bringing you this NFL draft series. And today I'm joined by Jon Ledyard. So I'm just going to bring you right in. Jon, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you having me on. This is fun. I've watched a couple of the ones you've done, everything I've had time to watch, and they're really enjoyable, and I'm pretty honored that you asked me to be on.
I appreciate you saying that more than anything, because your name is obviously a lot bigger than mine at this point. So I appreciate – I mean, honestly, I've been lucky to get a lot of the people I've had on so far. So hopefully that's a sign of things starting to progress and grow with this. But – yeah, your name is definitely out there. You are a well-respected, up-and-coming, draft analyst. So why don't you, tell me? I was just saying to you off air, I'm personally not familiar, not overly familiar with all of your stuff, like where how long you've been involved and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a lot of people. So for you to have risen kind of above, the shoulders of other people in this industry says a lot about what you do with your work. So please let me know a little bit about your background and where. Oh, first of all, tell everybody how they can find you and what sites you write for and everything like that.
Yeah, I write for USA Today's brand new NFL draft site that they started in December, and it is called The Draft Wire. Pretty simple, thedraftwire.com. And my Twitter handle is @Ledyard, LEDYARD, NFL Draft. So pretty simple stuff. I would say that I've always been very passionate about the draft and about sports writing. And when I was a little kid, I think when I was 6 or 7, I remember I always had the desire and the dream to be either a sportscaster or a sports writer, and really pretty much pursued that without giving a thought to many other fields throughout my life, really. And I remember when I was young, this is just a funny story to talk about the passion and when it started, but when I was young, I'm 26 years old now. So when I was 6 or 7, I loved the NFL, but I didn't really have a way to watch. We didn't have cable at the time. We got a little bit, if we messed with our antenna, we got Monday Night Football on ABC a little bit, but it wasn't anything special. Got to watch the first half on a school night, and then we had to go to bed to get up the next morning for school. But I remember on Monday nights, my dad would work late. He would go in early on Mondays and he would work late. And when he came back on Mondays, he would bring the newspaper with him, which would have the recaps and the little summaries and the statistics and everything and whatnot about the games from Sunday. And I would lay in my bed as if I was sleeping. He would come back late. He would toss the paper. He would open my door and toss the paper on my dresser. And he'd close the door and I would wait and I would had a little flashlight I'd keep under the blankets with me, and I'd run over and I'd check all the scores and read everything I could 4 or 5 times before I went to sleep. So from a young age, that passion was there, and it just kind of continued to build as I got older. And when came time to choose colleges, I decided to go to Waynesburg University, which is a smaller school out in southern Pennsylvania, but a very good school with a dedicated sports broadcasting program. They had their own TV truck. They had their own radio station. They had an award-winning newspaper, great professors, the opportunity to learn from some people who'd been in the field, including Lanny Fratteri, who was the announcer for the Pittsburgh Pirates for 33 years. He and I have become really close. So it was a great opportunity for me to be able to go there, to be able to learn there, and to really pursue what I thought at the time was going to be sports broadcasting. And still, I think someday it may be. That is probably where my biggest passion lies, and hopefully becoming a play-by-play announcer someday. But I love the NFL draft, and I always wrote for the newspaper when I was there, and did a number of different things with them, covering the sports beats. And I did a lot of broadcasting, and I did a lot of newspaper work when I got out of college as well. But I would say that throughout that process of being in school and making connections and meeting people in the field and interning, I interned with Pittsburgh Penguins radio and was at Consol Energy Center where the Penguins play for 20 or 30 games that year. And so having all those experiences kind of continued to spur that on in me. And eventually, after a couple, job swings that I can talk about too, if you want me to, but landed where I am now. So,
well, I wanted to interject, but you're giving me a lot, and I appreciate all that. I wanted to ask you what was the town you grew up in, but I also wanted to ask you, is Sigmund Bloom very jealous of you because his life's ambition was to be the Pirates play-by-play announcer. I think it was actually the stadium guy he wanted to be. But you mentioned you had some tutelage from Pirates fame.
Yeah.
Do you get anything from Bloom about that?
He's talked to me about it before, more about the area that I've been from. So he's talked to me about that area and him growing up there, and we've shared stories about that. But I don't think he ever mentioned wanting to be a Pirates play-by-play announcer.
Yeah, he was actually my first guest on this show, and I've had him on another podcast I did in the past. But he went to Syracuse because of their broadcasting program, and he wanted to be the Pirates play-by-play guy. So there you go. He's a diehard Pittsburgh man.
He is, and we've talked about that many times. And when I wrote for Steelers Depot, the site I wrote for before I started working for USA Today, he would always read my articles, and he would be like, I think this, and this about it, and we disagree and agree, but always great discussion. Sigmund's awesome, and he brings so much to the field in the capacity he's in right now. So jealously or selfishly, I'm glad we have him in the capacity he's in the field now. Instead of the Pirates getting him.
Okay. So now where exactly was the town you grew up in?
I grew up in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 minutes east of Pittsburgh. So pretty close to Pittsburgh. It doesn't take too long to get there. And so avid Steelers fan and Pirates fan, Penguins fan growing up. Pitt basketball, but never got into Pitt football for whatever reason. But
okay.
Yeah, definitely an avid Pittsburgh fan growing up, and still am to this day, but my focus is so much on all 32 teams now in my capacity that I'm not as in tune quite as much with the Steelers stuff as I would have been when I wrote for Steelers Depot and maybe a little earlier.
Okay. Were you a Robert Morris football fan?
I wasn't really at the time. I mean, I would follow them and things like that a little bit, but nothing heavily.
All right. No, I only say that because I remember traveling to Altoona to play Robert Morris a couple of times when I was in college. And I remember, they got a little fame when they got Jets former head coach. His name is escaping me now. I want to say Joe Kelly, but I don't think it's I think I'm wrong there. But you might be – I'm sure you're familiar with what I'm saying.
Yeah. I was actually – funny thing you mentioned Robert Morris. I actually went to when Robert Morris for men's hoops played Kentucky in the NIT in the first round, and yes. Obviously, I was cheering for Robert Morris. I've never loved Kentucky, and you always want to see that kind of an upset. Even though it's the NIT, Robert Morris was an 8 seed, the lowest seed in that. Kentucky was the overall 1 seed, and Robert Morris knocked him off. So that was being there and storming the court after. It was fun. So Robert Morris, good school for sure. And they've had some pretty nice moments in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that area is very popular and famous for football and high school football in particular, and putting out 5-star recruits and stuff. So were you a football player yourself in high school?
Yeah, in high school I was. Messed up my back pretty good. Back problems kind of ran in my family, but I had back issues and issues with my sciatic nerves in my back going down my leg. So I played, but I was always in a ton of discomfort whenever I played. So I began to become more passionate about lifting and staying in shape that way. And then when college came around, I thought about playing in college. I talked with the coaches at college. It's a Division III school. So, it would have been just for the love of the game, which I did. And I was set to play, and then decided kind of about a month and a half before college started, before I left for school, that I wasn't going to play, mainly because the opportunity to broadcast football was there at such a small school. I mean, you're talking about 1,500 kids probably at this school. So it's such a small school, the opportunity to broadcast with our TV production and our radio production, we're both going to be there from an early on in my high school or my college tenure. So I wanted to tackle those things and tackle my career. And I knew that as much as I loved football, I wasn't going to be in my future long term. And so I wanted to be able to build my resume as much as I could. And obviously, if I was playing football, I wouldn't have the opportunity to broadcast the game. Right. So I just kind of made the decision that I thought the best thing for my future was to stop playing the game, especially given the injuries and the issues with my back and things of that nature. So it was tough. I do love the game of football, but I kind of just logically saw what was going to be the best fit for me down the road and had to make the best decision for my future. And I'm thankful I did it. There were definitely times I missed it, but I'm definitely thankful that I made that decision.
Well, so far it's working out pretty well.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah. Now, did you ever see the movie All the Right Moves?
I've seen parts of it, I think, on TV before, but I've never seen the whole thing, I think.
Come on, that's like that could be your childhood, I would imagine, growing up, right outside of Pittsburgh, being a high school football stud and all that kind of stuff. You got to watch the whole thing. That was like one of Tom Cruise's first movies, and it's a masterpiece. It's a classic. It's an underrated.
I should watch it. I love Tom Cruise too, so I need to watch it.
It's an underrated football movie. It's whenever they have these like what was the greatest football movie ever, and you always get like Rudy and Remember the Titans and stuff. But All the Right Moves is often not anywhere near the finals. But all right. So you were telling me there were a couple other job routes that you had going on. So take me to where you go from going to college to now where you are with USA Today and covering the draft.
Okay, yeah. So I graduated college, and the opportunity was there to work at a couple smaller radio stations. And I think I would have enjoyed that fine, but I was a little bit worried at the time that I thought that maybe I would get pigeonholed into a small radio station and my voice would never be heard. And so I didn't know exactly how I would avoid that and still be able to accomplish my goals of being in the field. But I just felt like if I started at a small radio station, and some of the opportunities that were out there were with good radio stations, but I felt like I may get stuck there for a long period of time. So the opportunities were good, but I had another opportunity that I actually wrote about recently in a piece to work at a drug and alcohol facility for kids. It was a juvenile placement center, so kids would basically get court ordered there or have a psychologist order them to have time spent in the facility, recovering usually from drug and alcohol abuse, but sometimes there was petty crimes and things of that nature too that they would be in there serving time for. So I had an opportunity to do that, and for me it was just really interesting to be able to – I grew up in a suburban area, and so I didn't have a lot of this experience with inner city kids and the inner city culture as much as I wanted anyway. I had done trips and experience and worked in the city some, so I had a little bit, but not to the degree that I wanted to in terms of understanding the atmosphere and the environment that these kids are raised in and what kind of builds them as people. So I had that opportunity. I enjoyed it. I worked there for a year, working mainly not as a certified counselor with the kids, but kind of like as a youth worker with the kids. So we build relationships with these kids, and they were there to serve a certain amount of time. So tons of activities we led with them, and mainly I worked with a lot of the kids in strength and conditioning and lifting, and trying to get them to have another outlet for their frustrations and for the things that life kind of was beating them down with. And the weight room for a lot of those kids and running, exercising was a big part of that. And so I enjoyed that role. I enjoyed that time there very much. But then it came time for them to step away from that job and enter another job that also involved working with high school students, this time at a local high school in an area that wasn't that far away. So I worked for an organization there. I actually still work for them a little bit and work with kids there and do strength and conditioning in the high school. And I'm a soccer goalkeeper coach. I had to learn all about that. I didn't know anything about that when I got here, but they needed someone to step into that role, and I had the opportunity to do it, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed what it's taught me. And so I get to work with kids in a strength and conditioning capacity at the high school, work with a bunch of different sports. It's a very good school for sports, very successful, especially for a public school in our area. And so I've been blessed to be able to have that opportunity and work with some really good teams. But at the same time, as I was here and I was kind of working in that capacity, I wanted to do more in my field. And so I was looking around at opportunities and to get into writing even on a small scale. And a fledgling site called ProFootballSpot.com, which still does really good work, gave me an opportunity to come on board to write about the Steelers. So I was there a couple months, and they saw that I had a love for the draft, and so they put me in charge of their draft stuff. This was in December of 2013, I believe, was when they first hired me, and then into 2014, they brought me on to run their draft portion of their site. So ran that for the 2014 draft. Also for the 2015 draft, we had 360 some scouting reports up and did really thorough work on the site. I thought it was good. I mean, the site is definitely young, but did really good work and had a great team of writers working with me as well. And I was really impressed and proud of what we did there and accomplished there. And then shortly after that, and around the summer of 2015, early summer, Alex Kozora, who writes for Steelers Depot, which is a pretty big Steelers, if you're from Pittsburgh area it's a blog site, but they offer very unique content. They do a lot of great work, and Alex is one of the people I respect most in the field, and he reached out to me about potentially writing for them, and that was an opportunity I jumped at, and so wrote there for about 6 months. When I was there, I was on the sideline, credentialed for Steelers training camp, and working there on the sidelines, talking with another writers, and Neil Cooling, who works for USA Today, reached out to me at the time, and we had talked about potentially starting up a draft site and doing that for USA Today. And he had started Steelers Wire, which was the Steelers site for USA Today, and so he was thinking about expanding, and USA Today was thinking about expanding, and they just needed to find the right fit. And so one thing led to another, and 6 months later, they approved the draft site, and they asked me to come on board and run it from an editing perspective and from creating most of the content. And so I agreed, and it's been great so far. It's been fun. I am a little bit bummed. I wish, there's no way now. I wish it could have happened earlier so we'd have a whole off season to prepare, because I'm, focused completely on the Steelers and writing heavily about them. And then all of a sudden switch gears in late December and you're focusing on the draft. So there's more that I wish that we were able to do this year. But I'm really excited to refocus after this year's draft and hit next year's draft really hard. I think that's going to be an exciting step.
Awesome. That's awesome stuff, and quite a journey in a short period of time, and pretty much across the board. I want to compliment you for doing what you did to start and working with the kids, and kind of expanding on yourself personally. And to me that sounds like a very selfless act, and probably taught you a lot about yourself in addition to other people. And I'm curious, did that help in your writing in any way? Do you feel like that changed your outlook on life, or how you viewed the world as a whole, as opposed to what you were before that, where you felt maybe a little compartmentalized in only a certain way of life?
Right. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that for sure. But more than anything, I thought it was I'd worked with kids at summer camps in the past, so I thought it was going to be an enjoyable opportunity and everything. And I wanted to just step into, like you said, a world that I wasn't familiar with. And I did think that the purpose behind doing that was, to expand my own worldview and expand the way that I thought about life. And I definitely have seen it impact my writing, not only my writing, but I think also in the way that, people call it building connections, but also just in the way that you network and you interact with people in life in general, but also in the field, and realizing that backgrounds are different. And I talked about this some in the piece I wrote on Martavis Bryant recently, and talked about how in Martavis Bryant's situation, the easiest thing for so many of us to do is to lash out at him and to say, you're such an idiot. Like, how could you do this? Instead of understanding that, like, Martavis Bryant grew up in a one-parent home. Like, he grew up with his dad not in the picture, and he grew up with his mom barely being able to take care of him, and that stuff was around him every day of his life. And I've spent time and worked with kids who that stuff was around them every day of their life. It wasn't a choice whether they were going to do it so much, or they didn't ever see it as a choice. It is always a choice, but they didn't see it that way or understand it that way. They just thought it was life. They thought everybody did it. There was never this crossroads for them, and they decided to go down and do all these horrible things. Like, they never come to that point. We were hopefully at the facility able to provide kids with the opportunity to come to that crossroads, recognize how destructive their behavior was, and from that point on, provide them the opportunity to change. But prior to that in their life, they just had not had that. And so many of these guys, I mean, they're lauded from the time that they're, in middle school, if not earlier now, as these incredible athletes, and especially in Martavis Bryant's situation. And, you have a guy who is obviously an incredibly skilled football player and has got attention for that his whole life, and has been held on a pedestal for that his whole life. And when that happens, I think a lot of the time you become really unaware to your weaknesses, and you think of yourself as superhuman. You think of yourself, like so many of the kids that I worked with, as, nothing is going to deter me from doing what I want to do, from accomplishing what I want to accomplish. And you think you have that strength, and at the end of the day, it comes to you do come to that crossroads. And I think that's where Martavis Bryant's at now. And so I think we need to respect that when we talk about him, and we need to understand that he may never have come to that path before. Like, it may never have hit home with him. He may never have really got it, how destructive his behavior was. So understanding that about people, and realizing that sometimes, while it's easy to pass judgment, the best thing we need to do is give them love and grace. I think that working at the juvenile placement facility helped me understand that about life and about people to a higher degree than I ever had before.
Wow. And, that's very well said, is especially the fact that this, everybody's reality is different. What you think tastes good, I don't think tastes good. What you think is funny, I don't think is funny. Like, what you see as options to eat or to wear, I have totally different options. And, everybody's reality is different. And it kind of, formulates how you see the world. So to step out of your own comfort zone and, surround yourself with other people's lifestyles and situations, it really does give you greater appreciation for your own life, for other people's lives. You kind of, it's hard when we talk about athletes. You're talking about Martavis Bryant, and obviously with his suspension, Sammy Coates has been getting a lot of talk. Now, this is almost like a polar opposite as far as, off the field kind of character. He's done a lot of, charitable stuff, and, but we talk about them as players. So, we take our shots at them, and it's really, I hope for the most part, most athletes, and I think at some point they figure this out, whether it's in high school, college, the pros, whatever, but, you got to separate the business and what people say about me on Twitter, what people say about me on shows like this. Doesn't mean, they're talking about my personal character. They're talking about my playing, and that's it. And that's how people should view these guys and leave it on the field. And I hate when attacks start to become personal, where, I hate this guy, I don't want him on my team.
Right.
And it's not because he's not a, good player or you get where I'm going with that. But so when you played, what position did you play? I want to start getting a little into how you evaluate players and what you look for when you're, making mock drafts and all that. But real quick, before we get to that, I also wanted to say, I've noticed, in getting to know you better, you handle the criticism, very well. You give it back to your followers and the people that, kind of try to, needle you. And was that something that was just always a part of you? Or is that something you've changed and adapted to as you've become more popular?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that one of the things that separates people in the field is how they respond and handle criticism in general. And I have so much to learn as an analyst, as a writer, as a person. I mean, it overwhelms me sometimes. And so I'm never going to dismiss the fact that people have valid points. But if there's a trait that is good about me in this field, I think it's that I genuinely have very thick skin, I think, and that sure, there's a group of people, there's definitely groups of my colleagues whose opinion matter to me, but very, very few times are people's criticism going to get under my skin. And so because of that, I think I like to have fun with it. I mean, I think Twitter and social media, these are great outlets to have fun with these types of things. And if someone says something to me, I mean, I've had people rip on me in ways that I find greatly humorous. And I think that, it's a great rip. And so sometimes you got to give them props, and sometimes you got to fire back when it's lame. And so it's all fun, though. I mean, some are going to take it personally, but I think in our culture, just in general, the sensitivity levels are just at an all-time high. And I want to fly in the face of that as much as possible. So, I want there to be a direct line of communication where people can come at me abrasively at times and challenge what I've done and challenge what I've said. And hopefully we can have good discussion and learn and grow from that together. But if not, I'm definitely going to take my shots back in a joking way always, but and have fun with it, I think.
Absolutely. And, as you're saying that, I'm just thinking you were 16 when Twitter became popular. I was older than you are currently when Twitter first came out. So you've obviously grown up a lot more with Twitter than I have it. But I think like you said, it is a great tool. It's very beneficial, useful. It helps, connect athletes, writers, fans, So going back to where we were with what position you played, and do you have a particular position that you focus on more? I know you have to cover all, 32 teams now. I know you have to cover all positions. You have to try to, peg teams' needs, and, so that requires knowing every player and every team. But do you have one that you have a preference for if you had to pick one?
Yeah, I played defensive end, and occasionally would kick inside to defensive tackle, but mostly defensive end, and a little bit on the offensive side of the ball. I would play offensive tackle. at times. But I would say that when I'm scouting, there's not a position that I necessarily enjoy the most. I like all positions, and I like to vary it up and mix up the order in which I watch players. But I think I'm probably best at evaluating wide receivers, just looking at track record of players I've liked and things of that nature, and just probably have done the most reading and have the most understanding of that position. From the time I was a kid, always loved that position. And so I think that I have probably the best understanding of wide receivers. Tight ends also I think I've done well with, I think, in the past. But I would say the trickiest positions for me to evaluate still are probably in the secondary. I've had to do a lot of reading to understand proper technique with cornerbacks, and that as much as we get intrigued by athleticism at the position, and it is important, it doesn't always win. We've seen plenty of great athletes fall by the wayside because they didn't have the proper technique and the proper work ethic and film work to survive in the NFL. So I've learned to value those things better. When I first started, I remember when I used to watch the draft and I only knew 40, 50 players in the draft, and I would talk about what I liked about them. And I think back to some of the safeties. I always joke around. I thought Laron Landry was going to be like Ronnie Lott. I thought he was going to be amazing, and turns out he didn't offer much at the NFL level. Bounced around a couple places, got in trouble for roids a couple times, and then I think he's out of the league currently or barely hanging on. But so I've had to really learn to get better at evaluating safeties. I used to fall in love with big hitters and guys who would blow people up, and now I've learned that can I also value guys who process and guys who play the game maybe a little bit slower, maybe not quite as explosively, but are also not going to allow as many big plays and make as many mistakes. So every position requires so much nuance and time, I think, to be able to understand what wins. And you have to watch a ton of NFL tape to figure out what wins at the NFL level, what traits should be valued more than others. And I'm still so early in the process of doing that. I mean, this is my third draft of really getting involved in the process. And so I feel like I have come so far in that time. But I'm still so young for that spot. And so there's so much I still want to learn. And so there's so many other of my colleagues that I love to read their stuff, and I love to channel what they're saying. And does it work? Does it not work? I don't always agree with everything they say, but that part of evaluation is so new to me, I think, that I love to reach out and discuss things and talk with other of my colleagues about those things, because I feel like I learn through that interaction a lot better than I do sometimes even by reading. Sure.
And so another thing I want to ask you, and you're one of these guys that, is at a young age is so captivated by the draft, and, that leads to covering it and writing about it and talking about it, scouting it, analyzing it. I always remember the draft being a big thing, obviously, but it was never to this level, where it's every day, every hour, every minute, it seems like opinions are changing on players. There's just so much scrutinization that goes on throughout the All-Star games, throughout the combine, leading up to the draft. And it's just, a lot of it has to do with football's popularity on the whole. I personally think that fantasy football has a lot to do with that. That this show has kind of a fantasy, backdrop, and it's just, people have become more aware and of college players and more into it. But speaking of this draft, it is rumored, and I am, one of the people in agreement with this, to be a deep class, but not top end strong. A lot of good, depth players with potential upside, but not your stud elite level guys especially at the skill positions. So you were mentioning wide receivers. I don't want to pigeonhole you into any particular stance on any players at this point, because, as I mentioned, things are going to change probably by the time we hang up on this call. But, how do you view this class of wide receivers? And, who are some of the guys that stick out to you, and some of the guys that stick out to you for reasons that other people aren't necessarily talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that this wide receiver class, early in the process, I thought it was a weaker class. I wasn't crazy about the class. And it is difficult because you watch the last 2 years, and even last year I felt like I undervalued the class a little bit, just because 2014 class was so incredible. I mean, just an incredible class with so much talent and guys that are still just finding their way. I think even in a couple of years we're going to look back at it as one of the best positional draft classes ever. But So I think it's tough not to compare it, especially because I haven't been doing this forever. So once that luster kind of wears off of forgetting about the fact that I had 3 receivers in my top 6 or 7 players last year overall, and that's not the case this year, so this class isn't good. Not necessarily the case. And it's funny you ask about the receiver class because I'm writing about it now. I'm almost finished with an article on the receiver class, and kind of Matt Harmon from NFL.com and I were talking about how it's so important for fans to understand that any positional ranking, especially wide receiver, I think we both talk about receivers a lot because that's kind of his forte, but those positional rankings, people need to understand that even though we'll rank them in an order, and that's awesome and it's fun, that it doesn't tell the whole story. And I think that, I might think a couple players are better than Sterling Shepard overall, but I might think Sterling Shepard's the best fit for a certain team on the board, even if it means the guy I have ranked over him is still available there. So there's so much more to just the number rankings for these players, especially for receivers, I think. And this article is just about finding your flavor at the position. And so when I look at the class, I look at guys who, people use the term number 1 receivers. In today's NFL, I'm not sure that term has a ton of value anymore, or as much as we thought it did maybe a couple years ago, because it's such a passing league. Teams are in 11 personnel all the time with wide receivers. So you got 3 on the field. And, look at team like New England. There's no, Julian Edelman plays in the slot most of the time, but no one would ever, I don't even think in today, the way we talk about number 1 wide receivers, would peg him or call him that, but that's essentially what he is, and he does it for one of the best teams in the NFL at a high level. So what exactly is a number 1 receiver? And I'll still use the term with fans because they understand it, but internally when I evaluate, I've kind of been throwing that term out a little bit more because even a team like Denver, most people would say off the cuff that Demaryius Thomas is their number 1 wide receiver. But isn't Emmanuel Sanders put up better production than him the last 2 years and been more consistent? So I think you have to balance your receiving core is basically what it is. And, you can look at so many teams around the NFL and say that. Even Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant, the way their skill set complemented each other was huge. And obviously Brown is the number 1 receiver, I think, in the NFL, but in that situation, but still Brown became so much more productive when Bryant was available because of the way that the skill sets balanced each other and the way that they forced defenses to respond to their presence. So I think that you look at teams across the NFL, and that's an important way to evaluate receivers. And that's just an example. It could be any position. But for me, when I look at this class, I think Laquan Treadwell is still a guy I like a lot. I still think he's a first-round pick, even with the slow workout times and things of that nature. But Michael Thomas for Ohio State is just right there with him for me. I think that Treadwell is just a vicious player, and I love that about players, and especially receivers, because I think he'll win even with his limitations. He'll be able to overcome them. Thomas isn't quite as nasty in the way that he plays the position, but he's a better route runner probably, and he's really just as good in the air and things of that nature. Probably a little bit better athlete than Treadwell. So I love both of them. I think that those two are, if I was going to tier the receivers, I would maybe put them in tier 1. And then not far after them, I have guys like Sterling Shepard. Can he win outside? I think so, but he's probably going to be best inside. And like Julian Edelman, Antonio Brown plays in the slot half the time, and he's the best receiver in the league. And so I don't think that's a drawback the way some people talk about it. I think people need to wake up. Today's NFL has 3 receivers on the field, and a lot of the time the best one, Larry Fitzgerald, all the time in the slot. And so I don't really care where Sterling Shepard has to be or where he's best at. I just know the kid can play football, and he can separate, and he can do it at a high level. So I love his game. Josh Dotson's completely different from Sterling Shepard, but another guy I like a lot in the early second round, maybe even sneaks in the late first round area. I'd be fine with that. But I don't think he's great against the press, and I don't think he is the route runner that Sterling Shepard and Michael Thomas are, but he is probably one of the best players. You talk about guys who play above the rim and can go attack the football in the air. He's probably one of the best at that I've seen. He's right up there with Kevin White from last year's class in terms of ability to do that. So love those 4, and I really like Corey Coleman from Baylor. I've been kind of all over the place with him. I think he's still an early second-round guy, but if he can learn to become a better route runner in the NFL and more consistent with his hands, I could look back at him and being like, yeah, I got burnt, because he has special explosive abilities and he works really hard. And I think that Baylor has a stigma of, Terrence Williams and Kendall Wright and receivers from there that haven't succeeded at the NFL level because they come from that spread attack. and Coleman's going to have to get used to. He takes half the plays off because that's how Baylor runs their offense. And there's going to be changes that he's got to adapt to in the NFL. But I think he's got a better work ethic and he's more athletic than those Baylor receivers that have gone before him. So those are my top 5 guys. After that, I think we get into the lower tiers. And there's good players still available on the board, players I like a lot. But I think those top 5 kind of set the tone for the rest of the class.
Yeah, and you can't completely knock Baylor. I mean, we don't exactly know what Josh Gordon would have been without the suspension. He's still young, so can't entirely knock the entire program. But it's funny you mentioned the wide receiver one thing, and the example you used with Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, and I say that because Eric Decker was really kind of the player that brought out this huge conversation of, is he a wide receiver one or is he a wide receiver two? And to me, Demaryius Thomas is the wide receiver one in Denver, but because he is so good, it opens up the door for Emmanuel Sanders maybe to have the better production. You take Thomas off the team, and I don't think Sanders is putting up that same production. So it kind of counterbalances. So you kind of need that number one type, even if he doesn't have the production. And I think that's what you get with this class is you also mentioned tiers, which a lot of people. I also noticed a lot of people trending towards doing a big board as opposed to doing rankings or whatever the case. Tiers are another big thing. It doesn't feel like there's that number one guy. Like last year, you had Amari Cooper, who pretty much hands down number one guy in the class. And you had a couple guys that maybe could have been a 1A. I had Devontae Parker as a 1A last year, but it was hands down, it was Amari Cooper. The year before, as you mentioned, there were 4, 5, 6 guys even that you could say could have been the number one guy. This year, it's a handful of guys that could be that guy. So Treadwell started that way. Doxson's kind of moved up. Now with all this time in between, the end of the season and the draft coming up, you got guys saying Coleman, and then other people making a case for Shepard. In the case of Sterling Shepard, I remember last year at the Senior Bowl, every executive that was there, all you heard in the background was Tyler Lockett's the best guy at this year's Senior Bowl. Best guy is Tyler Lockett. Best guy is Tyler Lockett. And then you say that to people entering the draft season, and again, I'm doing most of my talking from a fantasy angle, and people, Tyler Lockett, like I'm not putting him up there. Now you look at what he's doing in Seattle, and that's kind of opening the door, I think, for a guy like Sterling Shepard to be able to be considered and seen in that light. So it kind of goes to what you're saying about, the field being spread, 3 receivers, passing league, whether you're on the outside, in the slot. If you can play, you can play. And a guy like Sterling Shepard can play. So any guys that you're down on? Like, for me, the guy that last year, for instance, Rashad Perryman, I thought he was a solid pick until he moved up to where he went. And then I thought he was just way, way, way too high for where he went. The guy for me, like that's entering that territory now this year, is Fuller, who is it Fuller? Not Fuller.
Fuller.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sorry. He's kind of entering that territory for me where he's starting to be put in some mocks, end of the first round, and I just think that's way too much helium for him. I don't want to say he can't be successful, but I just see more Devin Smith in him than anything else. So is there a guy for you in this year's class, or a couple guys that don't fit what you feel other people's narratives are?
Yeah, I do think that. I think there's 3 guys maybe, and I'll start with Will Fuller since you brought him up. I definitely agree with you on Will Fuller. I have him as a 3rd round pick. That's where I value him, and I had to be careful with Will Fuller because Matt Harmon from NFL.com, I mentioned him earlier, but he's taught me the value of trump cards for so many of these prospects, and the value of being able to, if a player can do something at an elite level, and he can't necessarily, not that he's horrible at everything else, but let's say he drops the ball or he runs poor in-breaking routes at times and things like that. We need to be able to value what he does in the elite level at a higher, more than we disvalue the fact that he has a couple drops. And I think he's right, because in the NFL, Martavis Bryant's one of the best receivers in the league, and he drops the ball all the time. But we can live with it because he also does things that nobody else in the league can do. And so if you find a player like that, you've got to value him. And so Will Fuller, is one of the best deep threats in the draft. There's no question. He's blazing speed. He tracks the ball well. But does he do that at an elite enough level to be able to distinguish from the things that he doesn't do well? And to me, he doesn't. The biggest difference, you mentioned Devin Smith, and I'm glad you did. The biggest difference between Devin Smith to me, who was an early second-round pick to me, and Will Fuller, who I have in like the mid-third round territory, is that Devin Smith not only could win vertically with speed and with initial moves off the line of scrimmage. I thought to defeat press coverage, his feet at the line of scrimmage were exceptional. But not only could he do that at a high level, but he also was fantastic at adjusting to the ball down the field. Not just okay at it. And Will Fuller's flash moments where he's okay, but Devin Smith's ability to turn, find the football, high point over a defender, and reel in a tough contested catch. I mean, it was just such a smooth process. If the ball was in the air and he was downfield, he was almost always going to get it. He was bigger, he was thicker. So I definitely think Will Fuller does the same thing that Devin Smith does, but not at as high a level. And he's not going to make as many high degree of difficulty plays that Devin Smith does. So I love Devin Smith, and I think that he's going to be a very good pro once he gets healthy and is able to have a full offseason and a full season under his belt. But I don't think that Will Fuller can even do what he does at that high level. He's a little bit faster, but everything else, I'd give the advantage to Devin Smith in that regard. So I like Fuller. I think he can be a good piece in an offense. If you're a team that's has a bunch of riches at the position and you can, and your roster as a whole, and you can afford to spend a pick on him in the late second or third rounds, I get it. Like, you got to fill your needs. Your teams are going to look at these from a different perspective. If you need a big explosive threat, I think of a team, like Chicago or like Atlanta that might want somebody to be able to stretch the field for their outside receivers. I think Fuller can do that, and he can do it from the outside or the inside. And so I think that he could be a good piece for a team. And it goes back to what I said, finding your flavor. Yeah. I think he could be the right flavor for some teams. But as a whole, when I look at him in a vacuum compared to these other guys, to me, he doesn't match up. Two other guys I'll just say real quick. Tyler Boyd from Pitt, I like him. I just don't love him. I think he's a late second, early third round guy. Some people have him in the first round. Early in the process, I valued his ability to make tough catches a lot, but he just doesn't separate enough for me. He's a great route runner who doesn't separate well. And so I think that when you look at that, it's not just going to automatically get easier in the NFL. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you've got to value him appropriately. He's going to succeed in the NFL to some degree. He's going to be on a roster. He's going to play. He's going to be a solid number 2 receiver probably. I'm throwing out that term again, but he's going to be a solid part of an arsenal, but he's not going to be the focal point of your team's passing attack at any point. So I value him a little bit after those guys. And then Rashard Higgins is a guy who a ton of people love, and he's a good route runner. You love Higgins.
I do.
I think he's a good player. I have him in the 4th round. I think he's a solid player, but he's not necessarily a great athlete. He's not that fast, and he's not that explosive. So to me, he's a little bit like Tyler Boyd in that he runs great routes and gets open, but I don't think he has the same level of competition that Boyd faced. So I think that will be a little bit of a change for him. And I don't think he's quite as sophisticated a route tree as Boyd has yet. So I like him. I think he can develop into a good player, but again, I don't see him as like a focal point of a team's passing attack. And I think that a lot of other people think that he'll be excellent or elite at the next level, and I wouldn't see him in that capacity. So those are 3 guys that I don't maybe see as highly as others.
All right. Well, you mentioned separation with receivers, receivers being able to get separation, and I think it's kind of ironic that I don't think that the receivers can get separation from each other in terms of grading this class. I was mentioning fantasy. Do you play fantasy yourself?
Yes, I do. Not dynasty or anything like that, but I just standard fantasy. Yeah, I play for fun.
Okay. And do you feel like you have an advantage, or do you feel like the fantasy aspect kind of affects how you view, your what your real job is supposed to be in looking at the,
I wish I could say I have an advantage, but my wife beat me in fantasy football this past year, so I don't know that I have one. But I think that there is. Whenever you have a greater understanding of a team, the way that they typically operate and the way that a player may fit into a scheme, there's definitely an advantage. Does it always end up playing out that way and manifesting itself? No, but I think there's an advantage going in a little bit to that, and knowing how a receiver wins and how does that fit in with a quarterback skill set at the next level. So, for example, with Antonio Brown, I wrote an article back when Ben Roethlisberger got hurt and Michael Vick was a starter about how Antonio Brown and Michael Vick were the worst pairing you could possibly have, because you have Vick, who is basically to run around and do crazy stuff and kind of throw up YOLO balls and for his receivers and things like that. And I wrote out Martavis Bryant was a good fit or better fit with Vick, but Antonio Brown's production was going to go down because he just wasn't a great fit with Vick. I mean, Antonio Brown's a guy that relies on timing. Boom, he's open. He wants the ball right when he's open, and he's going to make something happen after the catch. And Vick has never been a rhythm or timing passer in any capacity. So it was just a match made in hell. And then Antonio Brown's production kind of fell off when Vick was at the helm there for a couple games, and because they were just a terrible fit together. But Martavis Bryant did well. So understanding that stuff definitely helped me. Now I had Martavis Bryant, so I started him and got good production from him, but I didn't have Antonio Brown. But I was able to tell all my friends, hey, you might want to start him. Now Brown's so good that sometimes it doesn't even matter. But generally as a whole, understanding that helped me make a couple moves. But I ended up screwing it up some way, or injuries end up screwing it up. I lost like every running back I rostered last year, so there's all those variables.
Did you have Le'Veon?
I did have Le'Veon. I had I can't even remember who I had. Matt Forte when he missed a bunch of games. I had Dion Lewis in like every league. I thought he would have a great year, and then he got hurt. I can't remember even who else, but yeah, I had a bunch of those guys that ended up missing a ton of time last year.
All right.
Remember me in that confession.
All right. I know before I get too off track, and we got to start wrapping up, but I want to just go back to remind you about Rashard Higgins, because I do love him this year. And the biggest reason is, I mentioned, fantasy twist on things. So a lot of the scouting that I do, and I don't consider myself a scout or an analyst. I just consider myself, very into it, very informed, everything like that. It starts with the numbers, it starts with box scores and things like that. And then it progresses into watching film and seeing players firsthand. And, any other information you could pick up, they're off the field stuff, and I don't have a ton to tell you about Higgins, but he was the second most efficient receiver his sophomore year when he had Garrett Grayson as quarterback. And that was only second to Amari Cooper. So you look at those numbers, and then when I watch the tape, and I like his intensity more than anything. I didn't see anybody more willing of a blocker from the wide receivers in this entire class. I'm not saying somebody can't match his intensity, but he was in on every play. And to me, that just speaks to his commitment, his teamwork, just a lot of just different traits that don't necessarily translate to the box score or to his routes that he's running. So
right. Yeah, no, I think efficient's a good word to describe him, because that's what he is, and I think that's what he'll continue to be. He'll be a guy who sticks as a number 2 or number 3 receiver and plays. And you talk about a guy who, some of these receivers you look at in the draft, and man, you only need to get him the ball once a game to make an impact, and they can make an impact. I don't see him in that capacity, but a guy that if he's going to be open and keep feeding him the ball. And Tyler Boyd's in that way too. I think he's going to be open, keep feeding the ball. They're going to be possession guys, I think, who move the sticks consistently, but they play an important role for their offenses. And that's huge, and that's where people look at, oh, he's a 4th-round grade, he hates him. Like, no, maybe compared to everyone else's opinion, maybe I'm lower on him, but I still value what he can do. And if I'm an NFL team in the 4th round, I'm on the table for him, because I think that, he's a guy that can help our team a lot. So
right.
I do see what you're saying there, and I do think efficiency is a good way to describe him for sure.
Okay. And the last question on the football stuff and relating to fantasy, do you have a sleeper at wide receiver in this class for fantasy purposes, like dynasty leagues, as you mentioned that you don't play? So this will be a completely unbiased answer.
This will be a completely unbiased answer. I don't know. It's hard to even describe what is a sleeper, what isn't, but I'll say 2 guys that I really like. I don't even think is Michael Thomas from Southern Miss even still a sleeper? Probably not at this point. I feel like everyone knows him. But yeah. I'll say 2 guys that I think are going to be sleepers from this year's class. Malcolm Mitchell from Georgia still is not getting enough love. Man, he is a good route runner. He's been banged up and hurt, but man, I thought in a lot of ways when Carew got hurt and Shepard got out of practice too, I think, in Mobile, that he was maybe one of the best receivers there that was practicing every day and playing. He makes tough catches. He's extremely competitive. You talk about intense. Oh man, Malcolm Mitchell comes to play every time. I think he's a good route runner. I think he's got really good hands, and he can win in the air. He can separate. I think he's just going to be a really good receiver in the NFL if he gets the chance. And Chris Moore from Cincinnati is another guy I really like, and I thought he had a good week in Mobile. not the biggest receiver, but he plays really big, and he wins above the rim a lot. He's a guy that can high point the football pretty consistently, super strong hands. Not going to blow anybody away in his routes like Sterling Shepard, but if I always say, if you can't separate on the ground, you better be able to separate in the air. And I think Chris Moore does that. Tons of tough catches he came up with at Cincinnati. There's like 100 Cincinnati receivers in this year's draft, but I definitely think he's the best, and he's the guy that's going to make an impact.
Yeah, I remember Cecil Lammy telling me he was big on Moore as well.
Oh, nice.
So my big sleeper, and I'm going to tease this because I've had talks with him. He says he's going to come on. He's going to be a guest, so you have this to put in your resume as well. But the nation's leading receiver and one of my biggest sleepers, actually my biggest sleeper in this class, Kieris Garrett out of Tulsa. He'll be a future guest on the show, and that's my big sleeper. So for anybody who hasn't seen me write that or tweet that anywhere, there you go. So when you're not covering football, what other things are you into? Are you a Pirates fan? We mentioned the Pirates earlier. Movies, music. What are some other things you like to do?
Yeah. So when I'm not covering football, which my wife would say is rarely, so when I'm not watching tape or doing anything like that, I enjoy working out a lot. I've always been a big workout guy, so I enjoy lifting. Yeah, I enjoy movies. I mean, I enjoy traveling a lot. I think my wife and I have gotten to do a lot of it recently. We've only been married for about a year and a half, and so, but during that time, we've gotten to travel a good bit. And we just actually came back from a trip to California, to Anaheim, LA area to see the Sweet 16 and Elite 8
nice.
tournament. So I'm a huge college basketball fan and a huge Duke fan. So that was awesome for me to be able to see them. I knew they weren't going to win, and I knew their team this year wasn't very good, but I've been a very big Duke fan ever since I was a little kid, and J.J. Redick was shooting. And then I grew up and found out everybody hates Duke. I didn't know that at the time, but right. But so a huge Duke fan, and so that was fun for me. And we love to travel. My wife is incredibly into sports, more so than not just I'm into sports as a female, but I'll show her a piece of tape and she'll tell me, wow, that doesn't look very coordinated, or things like that, because
that's awesome.
Into football and into basketball too. So we have a lot of fun traveling and going to sporting events. We have kind of a bucket list to see stadiums and visit different sporting locations around the country and stuff. So enjoy that for sure. Like I said, enjoy coaching still, enjoy working in the weight room with kids and training kids. I thought about getting certified before. I just don't have the time with all this coming up, but that was actually on my plans to get certified as strength and conditioning coach. So I enjoy all those things. Movies, music. Yeah, I love Luke Easterling. I don't know if you've had him on, or if you
he's supposed to be on, but I know Luke. Luke is a great man. I have a lot of love for Luke, and he's going to be on here at some point as well. We just have not been able to coordinate that yet.
Right, yeah. He is. He and I have similar music tastes. I've actually found that out recently as he kind of types lyrics on Facebook and things. I'm like, oh man. So we both like hard rock, and I don't get along with the rest of quote unquote draft Twitter because they listen to rap and I don't listen to rap at all. So, but I love hard rock, love that alternative style music, and listen to a lot of that. And I'm a movie fan for sure, but I enjoy TV shows probably even more, and I like to watch a lot of them while I'm writing and things of that nature. So,
you have a current favorite?
I think The Office is the greatest show. There was a big discussion last night on Twitter between us, a bunch of us writers, and I think The Office is the greatest show of all time in terms of comedy shows. And then if you're going to ask me outside of that, I'd probably say Lost is the best show I ever watched. But current favorite, that would be a little bit trickier for me to answer. I really like this new Blind Spot show that NBC has. I think it's really well written, and the plot is still kind of developing. I love mysteries, so the plot's still developing, so it has me really intrigued.
All right. Now, is there any homerism towards saying The Office? And is this the original Office with Ricky Gervais, or is this the U.S. version, which was, supposed to be in Scranton, which is, your neck of the woods? So is there some homerism to that?
Scranton's pretty far away from me, so no, I don't think so. But it's just, man, if you're talking about pure TV shows that are written beautifully and ended beautifully, and even when Michael Scott left, it did get worse, but it really didn't get as bad as you think it should have gotten, because there's so many other good characters, and the show's so well written. And so I don't know, my wife, when we met, I had seen a good amount of The Office, but when we met, she kind of turned me on to full. She had watched it every night when she went to bed.
Right.
She puts it on and falls asleep to it, and so she had knew the whole thing by heart. So we started from the beginning and watched the whole thing. And I'd seen a good bit of it, but never the whole thing. And man, it's just awesome. Every episode just so funny, and now we watch it every night as we fall asleep. And it's part of it's that we share it, but also it's just a brilliant show, and it brings us a lot of joy no matter what.
Yeah, I've enjoyed watching probably all the episodes, so I would agree with you on The Office. It's funny you mentioned LA. I was just telling my fiance today that I miss LA and I want to go back sometime soon. And then you mentioned JJ Redick. I just have these weird stories in sports, which is kind of why I wanted to do the show. I just feel like I have access to things that the average person doesn't, and I just have these weird things that happen. So, I'm trying to share my experiences. So being able to talk to you and being able to share this with other people that may not have this opportunity to get you to open up like this. But I saw JJ Redick's McDonald's All-American game at Madison Square Garden. So his final, senior high school senior game before going to Duke, I got to see that. So I'm only saying that because you mentioned JJ. We got to listen. I apologize not to you, but to the audience, because I feel like I don't know if these are getting too long or too short. And every time I do these, I feel like they get longer and longer. And I didn't even realize we're almost up to an hour as it is. And I could talk to you for at least another, 2 or 3. So it's just, I hope people watching are feeling like these are going by as fast as they feel from, my guest and myself. But I do have to try to get a prize out of you. I don't know if you have something you can offer from USA Today or from Steeler Depot or your own personal collection, but I've been coercing gifts out of my guests to give to the audience. So if you have something on your mind now, that's great. If you don't, you can give it to me at a later date and we'll figure out how to give it away. But
I'll have to think about it. I mean, I haven't written a draft guide or anything like these other guys. I've thought about doing it maybe in the future, but right now I don't know that I have anything that I could give away. But
I'll ask you this then: is there going to be anything in print with your articles? Covering the draft, any mock drafts, anything like that? And the reason I say that is because I got Chris Burke to offer up an autographed copy of the Sports Illustrated issue that's going to have his mock draft in there. Nice. If we can do something along those lines, maybe that could work.
Yeah, I don't know that there will be, because there's such a divide between USA Today, the website, and USA Today, the newspaper, and all their publications, the written publications. There's such a divide between them that I don't know that those two would come together for a project like that or not, that I would be aware of anyway. But if there is, I'll definitely let you know. One thing that did pop into my mind that I could offer is I have a ridiculous football card collection from when I was a kid. So I would have to look to refresh my memory. They're in the other room in boxes, but I have to look to refresh my memory as to what cards I have. But I would definitely be willing to give. I mean, I don't know what player you would want, but whoever you name, I would probably have.
Okay.
I could work something like that out for you.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. That'd be awesome. And listen, that's a unique prize, and there have been others on this show. I don't know if you're familiar with Crazy Gaby. He's a DFS personality. He has this. He's known for this ZZ Top-ish beard he has going, and he's gonna have a beard hair that's gonna be framed and signed with the business card. It's one of 2. There's apparently there's another one of these in existence, so there's gonna be a second one. So yeah, that is a perfectly unique gift and something that you can only get from winning a contest that is yet to be determined. So last question I'm going to ask you, and I appreciate you making that possible. But last question I'm going to ask you, not what do you hope to be in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where would you like to be in 5 years?
Well, I mean, I love the opportunity I've obviously been given with USA Today. It's fantastic. I really see the draft as just such an open right now, an open field. If you're in that part of the field, I think it's just so open-ended. There's so much that hasn't been done with it yet that I would like to do. And so I have so many ideas, and, I don't want to actually say, them specifically. I want to implement them for this next draft. when I have a full off season to kind of prepare and set them up and do them well. And so I would love to see Draft Wire continue to grow and to blossom 5 years from now. I would love for it to be talked about, obviously, as among the top draft sites. And I think, based on what we've done in the first 6 months, I can definitely see that being a possibility. I mean, people have been unbelievable. The support's been unbelievable. Fans have been unbelievable checking out our work, and our numbers have been better than I could have dreamed of. And so I love the direction we're headed in, and I hope that continues to happen with the site. But if I was going to speak like what would be my biggest dream in the field, and I've always said this, I think that my biggest dream by far would be to announce play-by-play for NCAA March Madness tournament, because you think back in the greatest calls and the most iconic moments in sports, and so many of them come from March Madness and from the NCAA tournament. And I mean, heck, some of the best sports moments every year, you're guaranteed to have them in March Madness and the NCAA tournament. So I can't think of many things that would be more fun than that. So if I was going to tell you, like, where I will be, probably, I hope that DraftWire, becomes one of the, and I'm able to lead that charge to become one of the best draft sites. But selfishly, what I want is somewhere down the road is to be able to play-by-play announce for March Madness and for the NCAA tournament, because I just think that's to me the sporting event of the year, and so I love it because of that.
All right. Well, I have been joined today by the future Jim Nance, and he's currently covering the NFL draft. And why don't you go ahead and tell everybody again how they can find you and where they can read your stuff?
Yeah, USA Today's thedraftwire.com, new site they started in December, and definitely check that out. We got lots of good content up there, and you can hit me up on Twitter at Ledyard, Ledyard, NFL Draft, Ledyard NFL Draft. Yeah, I'd love to talk, with anybody who has questions or comments, criticisms about the site. Like, always love to hear from fans and their thoughts about things I should do and things they'd like to see done differently and things they enjoy. So definitely feel free to hit me up and we'll talk on there.
Yeah, and I will say John actually does get back to pretty much everybody that asks him a question.
I try.
Don't be shy. Don't be bashful. As he mentions, he's thick-skinned, so he can take it. But give him more compliments than taking shots at him. I really want to thank you for responding to me and for coming on today. I hope you had a fun time, and I hope your fans are probably going to be the ones that check this out more than anything. So I hope they got to see a side of you that they might not have known or might not get to see on an everyday basis when it is strictly just work you're doing as far as the articles and the stuff you write. But I really appreciate you jumping on. You're off to a great start, and I know the future is bright for you. So I hope when you ascend and continue to ascend, when you do a March Madness, maybe you can get me courtside seats or something.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you having me on, man. It's been a ton of fun. What you're doing is great here with these productions and giving fans an inside look at analysts, and I've enjoyed it. And like I said, I'm honored to be a part of it. And if I ever have the opportunity to get you courtside seats, I got you, buddy.
All right, sounds good. I appreciate it. So hopefully you'll see me in the future sitting courtside, and you'll be hearing John call a one shining moment. And there you go. All right, well, this has been another Hanging Einstein Draft Breakdown NFL Draft special edition series. I don't even have a formal title for it, but yes, you know what it is, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.